In the world of Manhattan high society, there were those who lived well, and then there was Alex Kingston. At 32, he was the poster child of fortune and decadence, a man who epitomized the art of indulgence. He had inherited his first million at 21, flipping it with a few sharp business ventures into several more, building an empire of investments and deals that few could rival. On the surface, he had everything: money, charm, and a life most people dreamed of. But underneath that veneer of success, there was a gnawing emptiness he couldn't shake. Alex moved through life like a figure cut from expensive fabric, his designer suits and sleek cars as much a part of him as the skin he wore. He was a regular at high-profile clubs, his name on every VIP list, and his presence guaranteed to turn heads. Women adored him, men wanted to be him, and the paparazzi were never far behind, eagerly capturing his every exploit. Headlines often read, "Kingston strikes again," or "Manhattan's Playboy hits another high," and though he wore that notoriety like a badge of honor, there were nights when he would look out over the city from his penthouse, feeling less like a king and more like a ghost. It was during one of these late-night contemplations that he caught sight of his own reflection in the glass. For the first time, the face staring back seemed almost unrecognizable. The once bright-eyed man was now dulled by endless parties, countless empty conversations, and a series of relationships that fizzled out as quickly as they began. There was no substance, no joy, only a relentless drive to keep moving, as if stopping meant acknowledging the void that had grown inside him. Then came the charity gala, a glittering affair filled with New York's finest, each vying to outbid the other on extravagant auction items for a cause none truly cared for. Alex attended as always, mingling with others in his circle. It was here he met Trevor, an old college friend who now worked for a non-profit in Africa. Trevor spoke passionately about building wells, providing clean water to villages, and the people who greeted him not with envy, but with genuine warmth. His enthusiasm was infectious, something Alex couldn't ignore. In that moment, a spark of something stirred inside him, a curiosity about a world beyond his own. After the gala, Alex lay awake, thinking of Trevor's stories. There was something magnetic about the idea of doing something purely for the sake of it, without fame or reward. The next day he made a decision. It was time to escape his cage of luxury and see if he could find meaning elsewhere. He knew it wouldn't be easy, that the world he was heading into would neither accept nor understand his past, but he was determined. For once he would be more than a playboy. He would prove, if only to himself, that he could change. The morning after his epiphany, Alex awoke with a sense of resolve that felt unfamiliar, yet oddly reassuring. Gone were the usual bleary-eyed aftermaths of a wild night out, or the immediate need to check his messages for another invitation. Instead, he paced his sleek, marble-lined apartment, coffee in hand, replaying his conversation with Trevor. It wasn't just about a fresh start. It was about facing himself. For so long, he had brushed aside the small voice whispering that he was more than his reputation. Now, that whisper had become a shout, echoing off the cold walls of his lavish home. His decision, however, was met with a mix of confusion and skepticism by those around him. When he mentioned his plans to his closest friend and personal assistant, Jaden, he was met with disbelief. "A rural charity project? Alex, you're joking," Jaden scoffed, adjusting his designer glasses as though the very idea was offensive. But Alex wasn't joking. He knew that staying in Manhattan would only trap him further in the life he was trying to leave behind. He needed an escape route, a chance to wipe the slate clean. Through a mutual friend, he discovered an organization looking for volunteers to help with a rural development project in a town he'd never heard of, Alderwood. Alderwood was a quiet, unassuming town nestled in the hills of North Carolina, a far cry from the skyscrapers of New York City. The project aimed to build community resources, repair homes, and set up education programs for the local kids, a far cry from Alex's usual boardroom negotiations. Yet something about it felt right, and that feeling drove him to submit his application with an urgency that surprised him. Despite his wealth, Alex wanted to go as any volunteer would. He didn't announce his plans on social media, nor did he make a grand gesture of packing. He packed a single suitcase with plain clothes and boots he wasn't sure he knew how to wear. When Jaden watched him leave with a look of unmasked skepticism, Alex couldn't bring himself to care. For the first time in years, he felt alive, a man on the brink of something important. As he drove out of Manhattan and into unfamiliar territory, he felt both exhilarated and terrified. The streets grew narrower, buildings shorter, and the air clearer as he left behind the rumbling heart of the city. He pulled into Alderwood at dusk, his car drawing curious stares from locals unused to sleek black sedans with out-of-state plates. He took in the modest town square, the diners closing for the evening, and the children riding bikes in fading daylight. Alderwood was nothing like New York, and that was exactly what he needed. He parked by the town's small community center, the hub for the charity project, and stepped out, adjusting to the sudden quiet that wrapped around him like a blanket. The air smelled of pine and freshly turned earth. He watched as a handful of volunteers finished up for the day, some chatting, others packing away tools and supplies. As he approached the entrance, he saw her. Sierra Lane was hard to miss. Her presence was magnetic in its quiet confidence. She had auburn hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, stray wisps framing her sun-kissed face. Unlike the women in Alex's world who spent hours perfecting their appearances, Sierra looked comfortable in worn jeans, a faded t-shirt, and scuffed boots that had clearly seen countless workdays. She was busy organizing tools, her focus intense. Alex hesitated, not wanting to interrupt her, but then she looked up, noticing him. For a brief moment, her green eyes held his, an unreadable expression flickering across her face. "You lost?" she asked, her tone neutral but edged with a hint of curiosity. "Not exactly," Alex replied, a bit thrown by her lack of formality. "I'm here for the volunteer project, Alex Kingston." She took him in, her gaze assessing him with a critical eye. He was used to women instantly recognizing him, or at least being drawn to his polished appearance. But Sierra's expression didn't change. If anything, she looked mildly unimpressed. "Right," she said, finally nodding. "I was told a new volunteer might be arriving. Didn't think it'd be someone like you." Her tone was pointed, and Alex caught the skepticism in her voice. "Someone like me?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. She shrugged. "You just don't look like the usual type we get around here, but I guess you'll learn fast." A silence settled between them, and Alex found himself uncharacteristically unsure of how to respond. The usual charm he wielded so easily seemed to falter under her straightforward gaze. This woman, standing before him in a dusty community center, wasn't swayed by his appearance, his money, or his charm, and somehow, that only made him want to prove himself more. "Well, I'm here to help," he said finally, his voice sincere. "So if there's work, point me to it." Sierra raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by his response. Without a word, she handed him a clipboard with a list of tasks for the next day. "We start early, 6 a.m. sharp. Don't be late." Alex took the clipboard, nodding as he looked over the tasks. They were nothing like the deals he was used to negotiating. Instead, they were simple but demanding, repairing fences, building shelters, assisting with deliveries to families in need. It was a world away from his penthouse meetings and cocktail receptions, yet he felt a strange thrill as he took it all in. "Got it," he replied, trying to match her calm intensity. "Good," she said, her lips curving into a hint of a smile. "See you at dawn." As she walked away, Alex couldn't help but feel an odd mix of frustration and intrigue. He had expected a warm welcome, perhaps even a bit of admiration from those he was helping. Instead, he had been met by a woman who saw through his status as easily as he saw through his designer clothes. But as he stood there in the fading light, he realized that this was exactly what he needed. A fresh start meant proving himself, not to those who knew his name, but to people like Sierra, who would judge him solely by his actions. That night, Alex lay awake in the modest motel room he had booked, feeling both anxious and alive. The Alex Kingston, who had boarded his sleek sedan in Manhattan, was slowly being replaced by someone he barely recognized. And as he drifted to sleep, he couldn't shake the thought of Sierra, whose down-to-earth determination had sparked something within him. Tomorrow, his real work would begin. When Alex woke up the next morning, his usual routine of luxury was nowhere to be found. Gone were the luxury sheets, the gourmet coffee, and the silent efficiency of his assistants. Instead, he was greeted by the sound of his outdated motel alarm clock blaring at 5 a.m. and the smell of stale coffee drifting from the communal motel kitchen. With a resigned sigh, he got up and dressed in jeans, a plain t-shirt, and the work boots he'd bought specifically for this trip. He was aware that he looked drastically different from his usual polished self, but that was the point. This was his chance to blend in, or at least try. By the time he reached the community center, the early morning light was just beginning to break over the hills, painting the town of Alderwood in shades of gold. A handful of volunteers were already gathered, chatting casually and setting up tools. He recognized Sierra instantly, standing at the center of the group, clipboard in hand, her focus intense as she briefed the team on their tasks. When she saw him approach, she barely acknowledged him, offering only a curt nod before addressing the group again. "All right, let's get started. Today we'll focus on rebuilding the Johnson family's fence and setting up the supply shed on the north side of the lot," she said, her voice steady and clear. Alex waited, expecting her to assign him something that felt substantial. After all, he was here to work and prove himself. But instead, she glanced his way and handed him a pair of gloves, gesturing to a pile of lumber nearby. "Start by moving those over to the build site," she said, barely glancing his way. He blinked, a bit thrown. "You mean just move them?" "Is that going to be a problem?" she asked, one eyebrow raised in a challenge. "No," he replied quickly, feeling his pride prickled but unwilling to show it. "I'll get to it." As he moved the lumber, he could feel the curious glances of the other volunteers on him. He was used to people looking at him, but this was different. It wasn't admiration or envy in their eyes. It was mild curiosity mixed with doubt. He was the out-of-place city boy, a stranger in an environment that didn't quite fit him. It wasn't a feeling he relished, but he had committed to being here, and he wasn't going to back down at the first sign of discomfort. For the next few hours, he worked tirelessly, moving heavy wood planks and loading tools under the early sun. His muscles ached, and sweat dampened his shirt, something he hadn't experienced in years. But each time he looked up, he caught a glimpse of Sierra, and that was enough to keep him going. She was relentless, moving from task to task with ease, clearly accustomed to this kind of work. There was a quiet strength in her that Alex couldn't help but admire, even if he couldn't quite put his finger on why. During a short break, he wiped his brow and watched her from a distance. She was deep in conversation with another volunteer, laughing at something they said, her smile bright and genuine. It struck him that she was nothing like the people he was used to. There was no pretense with her, no airs or hidden agendas. She was simply herself, and for some reason that fascinated him. When he returned to work, she approached him, carrying a hammer and nails. "We're setting up the fence posts now. Can you handle digging?" "Digging?" he asked, a bit incredulously. She smirked. "Yes, digging. If that's too much, I can get someone else to—" "No," he interrupted, determined. "I can handle it." "Good," she replied and handed him a shovel. "I'll be setting the posts, so just follow my lead." For the next several hours, they worked side by side, digging holes and setting up the posts. Sierra worked in silence, focused on the task at hand, and Alex tried to match her pace. Though he wasn't used to manual labor, he found himself enjoying the physicality of it. There was something satisfying about seeing the immediate results of his work, the sweat and effort translating directly into something real, something that mattered. At one point, he noticed Sierra struggling with a particularly heavy post. He quickly stepped in, taking the weight from her hands and helping her position it. "Thanks," she said, her voice softer than usual, but she didn't meet his gaze. He could sense her pride, her reluctance to rely on anyone else, and it only made him respect her more. By the end of the day, Alex was exhausted in a way he hadn't been in years. His muscles ached, his hands were raw, and his clothes were covered in dirt. But for once, he felt something other than the usual emptiness that had haunted him in Manhattan. There was a strange sense of fulfillment, a quiet satisfaction in knowing he had done something real. As the sun set and the volunteers began packing up, Sierra approached him again, her expression unreadable. "Not bad, Kingston. Didn't think you'd last the whole day." He chuckled, trying to ignore the pride swelling in his chest. "I'm not as fragile as you think." She crossed her arms, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "We'll see about that. Tomorrow's going to be even harder." "I'll be here," he replied, meeting her gaze with a newfound determination. "Good." She nodded, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw a glimmer of approval in her eyes. As he walked back to his motel that evening, Alex felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: anticipation. He was no longer thinking about Manhattan, the parties, or his reputation. His mind was focused solely on the work ahead, and to his surprise, on Sierra. Her quiet strength and determination had struck a chord in him, challenging him in ways he hadn't expected. He lay awake that night thinking about her and the work they'd done. He wasn't sure what lay ahead, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The following days passed in a blur of early mornings and hard labor. Alex found himself gradually falling into a routine, waking at dawn, working through the day, and returning to his motel in the evening with a satisfying exhaustion that was beginning to feel familiar. He didn't mind the aches and pains. They felt like proof that he was finally doing something worthwhile. Though the other volunteers remained polite, Alex could sense a distance between him and the rest of the group. They were friendly but reserved, as if waiting for him to prove that he was truly committed. The only person who seemed unfazed by his presence was Sierra. She treated him exactly as she treated everyone else, assigning him tasks without the slightest bit of deference or hesitation. One afternoon, while they were painting a newly built shed, Alex finally worked up the courage to ask her the question that had been on his mind. "Why did you decide to come here?" he asked, dipping his brush into the paint. Sierra glanced at him, considering his question before answering. "I grew up around here, left for college, but I always knew I'd come back. This place, it's home." He nodded, feeling a pang of envy. He had never thought of any place as home. For him, each city was just another backdrop, each penthouse another place to crash until he got restless and moved on. "Why are you here?" she asked, turning the question back on him. He hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "I guess I wanted a change," he said finally. "My life in New York felt empty. I thought this might be a way to do something real." She studied him for a moment, her gaze searching. "It's not easy to leave behind a life like that," she said, her voice softer than usual. "Most people wouldn't." "Most people don't have a life like mine," he replied, a hint of bitterness slipping into his tone. He hadn't meant for it to, but there it was, the frustration, the loneliness he had been carrying for so long finally surfacing. Sierra didn't look away. "You could have gone anywhere, but you came here. That means something." He was struck by the sincerity in her voice, by the way she looked at him without judgment or pity. For the first time, he felt like someone truly saw him, not the wealthy playboy, not the headline-grabbing socialite, but the man he was trying to become. In that moment, he realized that Alderwood wasn't just a temporary escape. It was his chance to rebuild himself from the ground up, to prove that he was more than his past. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of gold and amber, he looked over at Sierra, feeling a sense of purpose bloom within him. Whatever lay ahead, he knew he wouldn't back down. He was here to stay, and he would make this work, not just for himself, but for the people who were beginning to feel like family. The next few weeks passed in a rhythm that was both demanding and surprisingly fulfilling. The days were long and tiring, but each one left Alex with a sense of accomplishment that felt foreign, yet intoxicating. With every post he set, fence he painted, and shed he built, he was shedding a layer of the man he used to be, embracing this new version of himself. Sierra continued to be his anchor in the project, her steady hand and relentless dedication guiding the group. Her influence over the volunteers was subtle yet undeniable, Everyone looked up to her. Alex often found himself studying her as they worked, watching the way she moved with ease through every challenge, how she managed to bring a quiet confidence into everything she did. Though she was still reserved around him, there were moments when he sensed something beneath her guarded exterior. A glimmer of warmth, a hint of curiosity. One afternoon, they were both assigned to oversee a cleanup of an old community park. The place was overgrown with tangled bushes and broken benches. Despite its state, Alex could see it had once been beautiful, a place where people came together, children played, and memories were made. Sierra was already working when he arrived, her hands wrapped around a pair of garden shears as she tackled a thick shrub. She barely acknowledged him, absorbed in her work as usual. "Need any help?" he asked, rolling up his sleeves. She shot him a sideways glance, her lips curving into the slightest of smiles. "Only if you can handle it." He chuckled, picking up a rake and beginning to clear away the fallen branches and debris scattered around the area. They worked side by side in silence for a while, each focused on the task at hand. But as they toiled together, Alex felt a familiar tension building between them, a mixture of frustration and attraction that had grown stronger with each passing day. "So," he said, breaking the silence, "have you always been this serious?" Sierra glanced at him, one eyebrow raised. "I'm serious when there's work to be done." "You don't even take breaks," he continued, pressing a bit. "Haven't you ever thought about, relaxing? Maybe having a little fun?" She smirked, shaking her head. "You sound like everyone else in your world. Fun isn't the priority here, Alex. Not when there are real things that need to be done." "Fair enough," he conceded, trying to keep the mood light. "But if you did have some time for fun, what would you do?" She paused, caught off guard by his question. For a moment her face softened, a small smile playing at her lips. "Maybe I'd go hiking or fishing. Something quiet, outdoors. I don't need a big party or a flashy event to enjoy myself." Alex absorbed this, imagining her in the serene landscapes that Alderwood had to offer, surrounded by nature. It suited her. "What about you?" she asked, a hint of curiosity finally breaking through her guarded demeanor. "What did you do for fun before? All this?" He hesitated, feeling a pang of discomfort as he thought back to the life he'd left behind. "Parties, clubs, expensive vacations," he admitted. "But honestly, none of it ever felt real. It was just distraction." Sierra nodded, as if she understood. She didn't judge him, didn't make him feel small for the life he used to live. She just listened. And in that simple act, Alex felt more seen than he ever had before. They continued working, but the silence between them was no longer heavy. Instead, it felt charged, a current running beneath their words and glances. At one point, as they cleared away a particularly stubborn vine, their hands brushed. It was a brief touch, accidental, but it sent a jolt through Alex that left him momentarily speechless. He looked up to find Sierra watching him, her green eyes steady, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. Neither of them said anything, but in that shared glance there was a promise of something more, something fragile and beautiful, hidden beneath layers of duty and responsibility. As the sun began to set, casting the park in shades of amber, Alex felt a strange, unfamiliar feeling bloom in his chest. It was more than attraction, more than simple curiosity. It was a longing for something real, something that felt like home. And for the first time, he dared to hope that he might find it here in Alderwood with Sierra. Just as Alex began to feel settled in Alderwood, his old life came crashing back with a force that he hadn't anticipated. News of his time in the quiet town had somehow reached the tabloids, sparking rumors and speculation about his disappearance from New York. His social circle, the ones who thrived on gossip and intrigue, found it amusing that Alex Kingston, Manhattan's notorious playboy, had decided to play country boy for a while. One morning, as he arrived at the community center, he noticed Sierra's expression was tense. She handed him her phone, where a tabloid article was displayed on the screen, the headline reading, Alex Kingston's rural escape playboy turns philanthropist. I didn't want to bring it up, but... She trailed off, her gaze hardening. Is this why you're here? Alex felt a knot tighten in his chest. He had tried so hard to leave that world behind, to prove that he was more than just a headline. But now it seemed like his past was determined to follow him, no matter how far he ran. No, he replied, his voice firm. That's not why I'm here. I came because I wanted to make a change, to do something real. Sierra studied him, her expression skeptical. It's hard to believe that someone like you would give up everything just to volunteer here. Alex took a deep breath, trying to keep his frustration in check. I know how it looks, but this isn't some publicity stunt. I needed this, Sierra. I needed to find something meaningful. I'm not that person anymore, she sighed, crossing her arms. Look, I don't care about your past, but I care about this community, and I won't let it be used as some kind of story for people like you to feel good about themselves. Her words stung, more than he'd expected. He could feel the familiar urge to defend himself, to explain everything he'd been through, but he knew that words wouldn't be enough. Sierra wasn't the kind of person who could be swayed by promises or charm. She needed actions, proof that he was truly committed. Without another word, she walked away, leaving him standing there, feeling more alone than he had since he'd arrived in Alderwood. Over the next few days, the distance between them grew. Sierra kept their interactions strictly professional, never lingering to chat, never meeting his gaze. It hurt more than he wanted to admit. Her approval, her respect, it had come to mean more to him than he'd realized. But the incident also served as a wake-up call. He knew he couldn't expect to outrun his past forever. If he truly wanted to leave that life behind, he had to confront it, own up to the man he used to be, and take responsibility for the choices he'd made. One evening, he decided to take the first step. He called his lawyer, arranging to sell off his shares in several companies that were known for their controversial practices. It was a small step, but it was a start. He wanted to reinvest his wealth into causes that aligned with his new values, focusing on community development, environmental sustainability, and education. When word of his decision spread through the tabloids, Alex braced himself for the backlash. He knew the headlines would be ruthless, the speculations endless. But for once, he didn't care. His focus was on Alderwood, on the people he was coming to care about, and on proving to Sierra and to himself that he was more than his past. In the weeks that followed, Alex threw himself into the work with renewed purpose. He took on extra tasks, volunteered for the toughest jobs, and worked alongside the residents, doing everything he could to make a difference. Slowly, the town began to warm to him. People who had once looked at him with skepticism now greeted him with smiles, and he found himself forming genuine friendships for the first time in years. One afternoon, as he was helping to organize a community event, he felt a familiar presence beside him. He turned to find Sierra standing there, her expression softer than it had been in weeks. I heard about what you did, she said, her voice quiet. With your shares. He nodded, feeling a mix of relief and gratitude that she'd noticed. It was time for a change. She looked at him for a long moment, as if searching for something in his eyes. Finally, she nodded, a small smile breaking through her usual composure. Maybe I misjudged you, Kingston. The tension that had been lingering between them melted away, replaced by something warmer, something real. For the first time, he saw Sierra's guard drop, and he realized that beneath her tough exterior was a woman who had been hurt before, who had learned not to trust easily. Over the next few weeks, their relationship began to blossom, fueled by shared moments of laughter, late-night conversations, and a mutual respect that had been hard-earned. They spent evenings together, talking about their dreams, their fears, and their hopes for the future. Alex found himself opening up to her in ways he never had with anyone else, sharing pieces of himself he hadn't even known were there. As Alex and Sierra's relationship deepened, he felt more vulnerable yet more whole than he ever had before. Their conversations stretched into the night. Sitting on the porch of the community center after long days of work, sharing stories of their childhoods and dreams they had once dismissed as impossible. Sierra's presence grounded him, and with her, he began to see a new path forward, one that wasn't paved with wealth or fame, but with real connection, purpose, and, for the first time, love. But despite the peace he found in Alderwood, his past refused to remain silent. Rumors of Alex's departure from his corporate life had started to reach his family and business associates, sparking anger and confusion. The decisions he had made were a direct affront to the legacy his father had envisioned for him, a legacy of power, status, and, ultimately, profit. Soon, his lawyer informed him that his family was threatening to cut him off from a substantial part of his inheritance if he continued to throw it away on charity projects. When Sierra found him one evening, deep in thought on the steps of the community center, he didn't hide his troubles from her. He explained the pressures he was facing, the calls and messages from old friends, business partners, and his father, all demanding explanations for his actions. "So what will you do?" she asked, her tone even but her eyes filled with concern. Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. I've spent my whole life following in my father's footsteps. This was supposed to be my chance to find my own path, but maybe I'm not strong enough to walk away." Sierra placed her hand on his, her touch steady and warm. "Strength isn't about proving anything to them, Alex. It's about knowing what's worth fighting for and being willing to make sacrifices for it." Her words struck him deeply. In that moment, he realized that the wealth and status he had once held so dear had come at a cost he was no longer willing to pay. He didn't need their approval, nor did he need their money, if it meant abandoning the life he was building in Alderwood, the life he was building with Sierra. The next morning, he made a call to his family, formally stepping back from his former life and any claims to the inheritance. It was a decision that felt terrifying, but liberating, and with each passing hour, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. His future might be uncertain, but for the first time, he felt at peace with his choices. When he told Sierra about his decision, she was silent for a moment, her eyes reflecting an admiration she didn't need to voice. Instead, she took his hand, giving him a soft smile that said more than words ever could. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, her voice full of conviction. "We both are." As the weeks turned into months, Alex found himself more deeply woven into Alderwood's fabric than he ever thought possible. He continued his work with the charity project, forming bonds with the people in the community, helping the local children with their schoolwork, and organizing small events to bring everyone together. Slowly but surely, the town began to feel like a home, a real home, built on friendship, purpose, and belonging. His relationship with Sierra flourished as well. She remained his anchor, challenging him to keep growing, to continue confronting his past and the values he wanted to uphold. Their love was built on a foundation of trust and mutual respect, and it grew stronger each day as they worked together to make a difference in Alderwood. One evening, as they sat on the steps of the community center, watching the sun set over the hills, Alex took her hand, his heart full. "I don't know where I'd be if I hadn't come here," he admitted, his voice quiet but sure. "This place, this work, it's changed me." Sierra squeezed his hand, her gaze soft. "Maybe you were always meant to find your way here, Alex." They sat in comfortable silence, basking in the warmth of each other's presence and the life they were building together. In that moment, Alex knew with certainty that he had made the right choice. Several years later, Alex stood at the edge of Alderwood's newly renovated park, watching as children laughed and played, families gathered, and neighbors greeted one another with easy smiles. The community center he had once been so nervous to approach was now a thriving hub for the town, filled with programs, resources, and support for anyone who needed it. He had invested his time, his energy, and even some of his remaining resources into Alderwood, helping it to grow into a place of opportunity and hope. Beside him, Sierra watched the scene with a smile, her eyes bright with pride. They had faced their challenges, weathered the storms of doubt and criticism, and emerged stronger for it. Together, they had built a life that was meaningful, not just for themselves, but for the people they had come to love. As Alex looked out over the town, he felt a profound sense of contentment. He had left behind the man he used to be, the playboy, the celebrity, the empty shadow of a life, and had become someone new, a man with purpose, surrounded by people who cared for him not because of his name or his wealth, but because of his heart. In Alderwood, he had finally come home. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe.